So I recently had a friend that went to Germany, and I requested that they pick up one thing, Scho-Ka-Kola. Now, Scho-Ka-Kola has a really interesting history. It's condensed chocolate and coffee condensed together in segmented chocolate sections. And here it's got 16, 8 on the top and 8 on the bottom, split up into triangles. And essentially, what makes this a really interesting product, at least the contemporary and the old ones, it was because it was widely used by the German military in the Second World War. Now, much like other nations at the time, they were developing some sort of ration system where you could take high caffeine and high sugar products, condense it into a small block, and put it into some sort of format where you could easily store it and transport it. And so Scho-Ka-Kola was something that was regularly given to soldiers on both fronts, and specifically the Air Forces and the Navy and the Kriegsmarine. U-boat crews especially got their hands on a lot of these just for practical purposes. And it also tastes good, even though it's a little bit bitter. Essentially, the purpose behind this was, amongst the other things that these sort of energy supplements do, it gives you a lot of sugar, especially if you need energy. You're doing a lot of manual labor, or more importantly, if you're in the middle of a firefight or a battle, you're constantly moving, you're on a forced march, which was the case for most militaries at the end of the Second World War. Constant fighting, constant combat. So you needed something where you can get basically a quick burst of energy. And so Scho-Ka-Kola had a high amount of caffeine content in it, which made it really ideal for bombing crews and pilots during the time. So amongst like other things that German soldiers would get with their normal rations, which was usually bread, margarine, butter if they could get it, and soup, and maybe some tinned meat, or essentially the equivalent of the American Spam, they would have Scho-Ka-Kola, which was, had the chocolate taste to it, so it tasted pretty decent. But like I was saying, it gives you a lot of energy in a short period of time, which is necessary if you're in that sort of situation. Now, originally this was invented by the German chocolate manufacturing company Hildebrand, which was founded in Berlin in sometime in the late 1800s. And it was introduced to the public as a sporting energy supplement in the 1930s, specifically in 1936 during the Berlin Olympics, as a sporting tool. And essentially it became very popular, and it was employed by the German military for obvious reasons in the Second World War. So not only would the Navy get it and the Air Force would get it, but it was extremely popular in for like tank crews, normal combat units that couldn't establish essentially food stations where you could actually cook regular meals. And if your unit was issued Scho-Ka-Kola, it meant that you were pretty much about to go into a combat situation. And so today, the caffeine content of modern contemporary Scho-Ka-Kola is lower. It's still very high, but back then you would get about, in 4 quadrants would be the equivalent of 1 cup of coffee. And now in this, you would have about 6 quadrants would have about the equivalent of a cup of coffee. So when you do taste it, you do get that sort of bitter caffeine aftertaste, but it's still you still do get that burst of energy that it was originally marketed for. I even found Scho-Ka-Kola in a video game, the original Call of Duty game. I was walking around a corner and saw a can of it on a table, which was kind of funny. I certainly do like the round design. You can see for obvious reasons why it was compactable, why you could just fit it in a bag or your pocket, and pretty much go wherever you needed to be. The other thing too was Scho-Ka-Kola was issued to, as the war was getting later on, and it was getting towards the end, this was issued more regularly, and this was also issued to POWs as well. So there were several first-hand accounts of American POWs getting handed Scho-Ka-Kola, which was kind of a nice treat, even though you were in a situation that you didn't necessarily want to be in. So that's Scho-Ka-Kola. It's a really interesting piece of history that you can still get today. The original Scho-Ka-Kola that was used at least in World War II, had the German eagle on the front. Obviously, back then, every commercial product during the Nazi era was covered in that kind of stuff. So I've seen these original World War II Scho-Ka-Kola cans in antique stores, but it's very expensive. Unless you're a collector, you can just get the contemporary kind, which you can pretty much get in any German supermarket from what I understand, and you can buy it online as well. But the Scho-Ka-Kola is a really interesting piece of history left over from a not so great era. So here it is, Scho-Ka-Kola.